Hello and welcome to Good Clinical, a podcast and YouTube channel dedicated to showcasing the future of medicine and human health. Today's episode is another in our partnership with Te Titoki Mataora, the MedTech Research Translator. Today's guest is Professor John Windsor. John is the Director of Surgical and Translational Research Centre at the University of Auckland. Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, great to have you. I must say that is quite the title. Good number of syllables in that one.
I have another number of other roles, so that's the one that's relevant to today.
Yeah. Speaking of which, so you are a bit of a serial entrepreneur in the medtech space.
Not by intention.
Not by intention.
It's just happened that way.
How did you get from being a surgeon, routine operations and moving into the translational research space?
Firstly, my father was a surgeon and worked as a missionary surgeon and in very impoverished settings, mission hospitals. And so I saw a lot of need, and I also saw a lot of unmet need despite best attempts. Mm-hmm. So I sort of grew up with that idea that, there's a need for better ways of doing things. That was even as a little child. But when I came to do surgery, I had a mentor who said, John, there are two types of surgeons. There are those who are going to be very good at operating. There are those who are going to want to actually do things better and devote some of their career to research so that in addition to the practice of surgery, to actually do research. And then, of course, the research that you choose to do is best to come out of your clinical practice, your surgical practice. So you see things every day that aren't great or could be done better. And so developing a critical skepticism about the status quo, about willing to question the way that things are done, to think creatively about ways to do things better was something that was kind of taught me early on in my surgical career. And so I really have sought to have that balance, questions and problems that arise out of the clinical setting to take it into a laboratory setting and actually see whether you can do something to address that, come with ideas from the lab and bring it into the clinical setting. It's actually like biculturalism or bilingualism, understanding the language and the culture of science and surgery and bring them together for the betterment of a patient. So that kind of tension or duality has been part of my surgical practice from the beginning.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you have a lot of colleagues that are just in the do the best surgical job you can do?
And they're great. I mean, absolutely fantastic, and they do a really, really good job. And they choose not to actually be contracted to do research as well.
So, if you're in your routine clinical role, you're obviously seeing a whole bunch of problems because, let's face it, nothing's perfect. The things that we do are good enough for the time when they were implemented. How do you choose problems to go after, or how do you triage them? Because there's not all of them are as accessible, amenable, or resolvable.
Well, it does matter about the lens that you use to look at these problems. One of the things we've done over the years is develop a course where we bring engineers into the surgical environment. And they see problems that I never saw. They'll ask questions. So I think it's about stepping back and being as objective as you can in seeing what you have in front of you. So, the suture material, the dressing material, the instruments that you use. And of course, there's been these mega trend in surgery going from open surgery, which has been the traditional way we've done surgery, to laparoscopic or keyhole surgery, where we reduce the size of the incision. And kind of my career has been during that transition, which has been quite exciting. Of course, the next transition is towards robotic surgery, which is, if you like, a development on the top of laparoscopic surgery because it uses the keyholes, but there's some advantages of robotics. So, this mega trend, if you like, to less invasiveness has been part of the way in which we've practiced and having to make adjustments. That itself brings up problems. How do you ensure optimization and clarity of the vision when you're using a small lens in a highly humid and sometimes splattered environment? How do you get rid of the mist or the fog that comes because the temperature differential when you put a cold gas into a warm abdomen? It's just like your windscreen. So there's little practical problems like that you can just accept as part and parcel of your job, or you can say, actually, there's something that I might be able to do something about.
Yeah, so I suppose an advancement in the field of going from open surgery to laparoscopic and then further into robotic opens up new problems which require novel solutions.
Exactly.
And might thus require a multidisciplinary approach. Like the surgeon's not going to have a good understanding of the physics or whatever of certain aspects, so that's when you need the engineering team to come in.
So you anticipate something that I think is important to sort of convey about what we do. Bringing together basic scientists, engineers, and clinicians has been a real passion of mine, and that's what we have within the STAR Centre. And it's actually the way in which they look at the problems and they come up with different solutions. We could coat it with that. We could, change the design of that. And it is the multidisciplinary dynamic which catalyzes change sometimes. Bringing a problem doesn't mean you automatically have a solution, but getting the right minds around the table has been fantastic. And our engineering is within ABI, the Auckland Bioengineering Institute, out of which TTM grew. And so that's a really amazing environment for innovation. But can I say one more thing about that? Because I think engineers are amazing at coming forward with solutions, but the thing that I've been rabbiting on about for years is that MedTech starts with med. And that's what we've just been talking about, that actually recognizing clinically relevant problems that need to be solved is where it really should start. And then you come up with the solutions rather than thinking, hey, I've got this great tech. Where can I use it?
It's push the square peg into a round hole.
Exactly. We've got to find somewhere how to use this cool thing. Yeah.
Just taking a step back, what is the advantage of doing a laparoscopic surgery over the open surgery?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Why do we pivot towards that?
It's a good question. Well, there's cosmetics to start with. Who wants a big scar? Nobody. All right, so the first thing is a scar. And a big incision actually can unravel, or what we call dehiss, open up, and that's a major problem. Is more wound to get infected. So wound-related problems are reduced if you have a smaller wound. So it's got to do with cosmetics and comfort. So the patient's recovery is almost always quicker if they've got a smaller incision, because it's often the incision that holds them back in getting back to normal activity. So those are two big advantages of that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, I've never seen a surgery firsthand. The only time I've seen surgical operation has been a very has been very much like Hollywood or whatever interpretations of it on. I think the Good Doctor is the last time I saw that. You're like, is this real? Is this actually the way they would approach it?
This was David Galler's story?
No, this is like a Netflix show, The Good Doctor. And you're like, I don't know if this is reality or not, if it's just been dramatized.
Sure.
But if it's laparoscopic, you've got a series of cameras and tools that are going through keyholes in the patient's abdomen, for example, if it's an abdominal surgery.
And that brings its own limitations, because your point of fulcrum, if you like, is at the level of the skin, and so your degrees of freedom, the angles are restricted. You can't just walk around the other side of the table necessarily and get a different view of something. It brings its own challenges.
Yeah, because I quite like cars. We talked about cars earlier before we got rolling, and I've tried my hand at fixing on an odd problem on an old car of mine. And I often think, like, man, this is so easy because there's so much space, because it's a 1980s Japanese import, like plenty of space for activities in there. But you think of these new cars where everything's crammed in because there's no space. So it's kind of analogous to that. Like,
medicine's moving the same way, that if you take your Audi or your Mercedes and they'll plug it in and they'll run diagnostics on it. And so you don't have to get your hands dirty to find out what's wrong.
Yes.
All right. So, and so sort of there's a parallel with medicine where we, automate continuous monitoring, for instance, and use AI to make decisions. And so that, it's really changing the face of the way that we practice.
Yeah. So take me through some of your translational research projects and commercialization experience to date. We'll get to AperCure.
How much time have we got?
Yeah, exactly. But obviously, it started from somewhere, the kernel of a need, of an interest.
We'll talk about another device in a minute, but the really most exciting translational thing that we're involved in came out of two observations. And at the moment, I'll come to that. The two observations were that people die in hospitals because of organ failure. They end up in intensive care, the heart, the lungs, the kidneys fail. And they always fail in a similar way despite the fact that it might have been triggered by meningitis, triggered by multi-trauma, gunshot, might have been by pancreatitis, all these different diseases. But the end stages are often very similar. That was the first observation. The second observation was that when I opened the abdomen in an acutely unwell patient, so often the gut is dusky, the intestines look dusky, they look sick, sometimes frankly ischemic, where the blood supply is compromised. And that also happens irrespective of the driving disease or the underlying disease. So those two observations really got me focused on whether there was a link between these two things. And to cut a long story short and an exciting story short, we've really moved forward with what's called a gut lymph model of acute and critical illness, which opens up new treatment opportunities, which I'll mention briefly in a second. But the concept is that the sick gut, which is because the body has decided that there are more important organs in the body than the gut, and we're going to prioritize the blood flow to those organs, and we'll be prepared to sacrifice the gut in order to maintain brain function, lung function, heart function, etc. And so this ischemic injury to the gut results actually in a change in the lymph, which drains the gut. You know what lymph is?
Yeah.
It's that forgotten circulation.
Green in textbooks.
Pardon?
Green in
yeah,
textbooks.
green in textbooks, exactly. I've never seen a green one in life, but it's helpful color coding. Yeah, so all of that lymph comes out of the gut, goes up into the central circulation, dumps into the subclavian vein, entering the heart, lungs, and kidneys, and it's bypassed the liver, which is designed in our bodies to detoxify. All right? So this it's like unfiltered sewer dumping. So this concept, which we've done a lot of work around this in animal models, etc., but essentially there's some real credence to this now. And the difficulty is, how are we going to take this concept or model and translate it into clinical care? And there's, again, cutting a long story short, there's been two strategies. One strategy is kind of a plumbing strategy, which says that, well, if this awful fluid is coming up and draining into the circulation, what if we divert it, externally drain it? Then there was a problem. Well, if we're going to externally drain it, we're going to have to get it cannulated. And the cannulation of that's actually quite tricky. It's either going to require a big cut in the neck, which you otherwise wouldn't have done, or we're going to have to find a minimally invasive approach to get into that. Again, without giving all the details away, a Russian interventional radiologist in the University of Pennsylvania, we've come to know and respect, has pioneered a way with interventional radiology to cannulate the thoracic duct, that main lymph vessel. And so now we have the technical solution to actually externally drain. And next week I'm going across there to look at initiating two different trials, one of which is to patients who come into hospital with congestive heart failure, you may appreciate, often get really bad edema, a lot of overload of fluid. And because they're resistant to diuretics in the subgroup of patients, they die from drowning. Their lungs get wet, they can't pee it out, they get very soggy. So if we could take off 2, 4, 6, 8 liters a day of this excess interstitial fluid, early evidence is that they can walk out of hospital where they would otherwise have died.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Incredible.
Yeah. And the other study we want to do is in patients who've got gut ischemia, to actually externally drain for the first week or so and just don't allow that bad stuff to get into the circulation. But that's invasive.
Yes.
And obviously in the long term, you don't want to have to poke people with needles and put tubes into places if you don't have to. So with Monash University, we've developed some drug solutions. Oral drugs taken into the gut, absorbed preferentially into the lymphatics. And so now we have the ability to target the badness in the lymph by an oral medication. So we've got trials underway in that as well. So that's an example of observations in a clinical setting, asking questions about, because there is no specific treatment for organ failure, whether there might be a clue here. And over the last 10 years or so, we've developed therapies, drugs or drains to try and deal with organ failure, and are now on that exciting phase of, is it going to work or not going to work? Is it going to be adjunctive? How much benefit will we get from it? But that's a translational thing. There's no commercialization in that at the moment, other than the fact that we've got patents on some of those drugs.
Yeah, I mean, that's incredible. I didn't realize that there was it makes sense. There's a hierarchy of the body's organs. We protect the brain at all costs, then the lungs.
I
maybe
bring
the
it
heart
back
before
to
that,
India, actually, because I grew up where the caste system was very obvious. You know about the caste system?
Yeah.
So I kind of, when I lecture on this, I talk about the gut being a second-class citizen.
Right.
But it's how it's treated. Yeah.
So it's interesting how that's common regardless of the original injury, congestive heart failure.
A common pathway tells you there must be something that you can, a treatable target.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's so fascinating. I mean, I could ask a million questions on that alone, but we don't have the time, John.
Yeah. Other things which I've been less involved in, other than supervising a PhD student, was, a crazy concept. It seems we do ECG of the heart to look at the electrical rhythms, and in fact, we can classify all of these dysrhythmias. Conduction blocks, tachyarrhythmias, migrating pacemakers, all those things that happen in the heart. And the cardiologist, the interventional cardiologist, now can ablate the right atrium, actually mapping the aberrant pathways and cutting nerve fibers in the heart, all minimally invasively, and restoring a patient's heart rhythm. That's been a really cool story. We're not heart surgeons, we're gut surgeons, and we have an organ, the stomach, which actually at times doesn't work. It goes, get excessive vomiting, distension. And so what we've developed, and this is Greg O'Grady's work with a company called Limpet, have developed an ECG of the stomach. We call it electrogastrography. And so Limpet does body surface gastric mapping. I don't know if you've interviewed him or not, but
I have actually. Yeah.
You have, so you know about that. So that work came out of a PhD, and now he's got the company, and so you know the story. But the classification of the abnormalities that have been seen are analogous to the heart. And so we have a parallel program, which also been spawned by Greg's great work, where we're looking at intragastric ablation therapy, like intra-atrial ablation therapy, but for the stomach. So Tim Angeli's leading that work, and he's just won awards on that.
Wow.
Yeah. So there again, it's like it's translational, but it's also actually, instead of starting with an original problem, it's saying actually here's some solutions that have been found for the heart. Would this be applicable actually to another organ? Yeah. Because our motility is driven by these electrical impulses, and of course the gut moves a lot.
Yeah. Well, I always find it quite like it's kind of logical, right? I mean, the body is awash in electrical signals because that's how muscles get innervated, and that's how things move around. Our heart pumps, our brain is obviously highly...
Not so much muscle up there.
Well, not so much, no, that's true. But signals constantly going off, and I mean... I often find it funny because we only know what we know from what we can sense with our five senses, right? And if we had other abilities to detect certain things, that would be part of our worldview. But we don't think of the world as being awash in electrical signals or radioactivity of certain types, radiation of certain types. So that's really interesting stuff. So obviously a lot of exploits across your career and currently ongoing, really interesting. But the one that Te Titoki Mataora supported is this AperCure device.
Yeah, they've supported others, but this is the one for today. Right. Yeah. So AperCure Surgical Limited, was incorporated 2 years or so ago, and has recently had a successful seed round. But its origins, the original funding came from TTM, and more than that, the Auckland Bioengineering Institute has a Cloud9, which Di probably talked to you about. This is an environment where small companies, fledgling companies, less than 6 employees, actually can prosper and obviously benefit from being adjacent to other companies. So that's where we are at the moment in the Auckland Bioengineering Institute. So the problem that came out of my 40 years of practice was that we send patients down to the interventional radiologists to put drains in. Often to drain deep-seated collection of pus or an old blood clot, or just to get control of a structure. And so these drains, I have an example here. This is a standard percutaneous drain. I don't know if you can see that all right, can you? That's great. So it's placed in when it's straight, and then when it's in the right position, the radiologist will create what's called the pigtail. And this is the way in which it's retained in the body. nobody really feels comfortable just relying on that. So a common solution is to put a stitch into the skin and then and tie that stitch around the drain to hold it in. And what we saw commonly, almost daily on the ward, is that's a really uncomfortable thing for the patient. But without it, losing the drain means they have to go back and have another procedure, right? So a number of companies around the world over the years have tried to solve this problem of producing a secure way of preventing drain migration or losing it, and at the same time to be comfortable for the patient.
So what? Why do the interventional radiologists cite this?
Why do they put this in there?
Yeah, why isn't it not a surgeon?
Oh, okay. Well, this is part of that mega trend we talked about earlier, about from open to minimally invasive laparoscopic keyhole surgery. But actually, the next, if you like, horizon is actually doing more and more with less and less invasiveness. And so the interventional radiologists are doing amazing things in all corners of the body. But this is a very important standard approach, which has been around for a few years now. And indeed, the problems, as I've said, have been there for many years. But we also have drains that are put in after an operation. If a surgeon's worried that something might leak, something they've joined, leak on the inside, this will give an early warning of that problem, because you'll see blood or pus or gut content in the bag, or bile in the bag when it shouldn't be there. Those things are anxiety producing in the surgeon, but an early warning allows you to have early intervention. So the problem was really an uncomfortable way of securing the drain, and without a stitch, it's not secure. So we took that to a multidisciplinary or sort of a think tank, or we brainstormed on it and said, well, what could we do to actually do that better? And so you kind of set out all the, if you like, design criteria or the things that you want to achieve. And we've come down on really four things. One is that we need it to be secure. It can be equivalent to the other secure devices on the market, but it needs to be more comfortable. People need to be able to lie on it and wear it for up to a week or more.
So I suppose a lot of these might be in the back of the abdomen or on the side.
And if they're chest drains, the patients are lying on it. If it's to a kidney, that it's on the side, so they can't lie on their side. And so we wanted to try and make it of a material that was very flexible and would conform to the body contours as much as possible. But a drain can be snagged on clothing or patient movement in the bed. A relative can kick the bag on the floor and cause quite a lot of discomfort to the patient. They can roll over in bed and pull it out. All these things, and of course, if the drain itself is compressed, flow won't occur, and therefore it's failed, and there be maybe back pressure and leakage on the inside, etc. So all sorts of problems related to that. And so if we can be secure, if we can be comfortable, and if we can protect the course or the route of the drain from skin to the bag so that there's no exposed loops that can be snagged, we can control the contour of radius so that it's not going to kink, then we're going to solve those problems as well. So we've built that into the design requirements. But I think the really unique thing that I'm really most excited about the product is the fact that it allows deliberate and intentional care of the wound. None of the other products on the market have designed in the ability to care for that exit wound. You might say it's trivial, it's only a puncture wound, but actually can become infected. It can be the route by which bile or pus or blood can egress. So you need to be able to inspect it, you need to be able to swab it to see if it's infected, you need to be able to dress it. And this is another area where I think it's quite useful. I don't know whether you can see this. This is a really early mock-up that's not IP protected. But there's the drain coming out. The black is the skin. And we place the drain in a channel so that it's actually not exposed at all to injury. And then at the back here, although it's shaped differently now, we can actually inspect the exit wound, and then with ribbon gauze just lightly pack that cavity. Doesn't require extra dressings, doesn't require a lot of extra tape on the skin, therefore it's more comfortable and less traumatizing to the patient. So that's what we've done. And and we're starting clinical trials now.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. So how often do these drains get snagged and get pulled out or dislodged, or how common are infections? I imagine they're fairly common if you've got an open wound with a tube going through it.
Yeah.
There must be the complications of these must be fairly common.
Yeah, and you'd say that a lot of those aren't sort of life-threatening, but the quality of a person's experience in hospital is really important, and increasingly. And when you talk to the patients about after an operation, done a really major pancreatic resection, for instance, they say, well, in clinic 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, you say, looking back, what was the toughest part of your operation? It's amazing how often they said, actually, that tube they had stuck in there on the side, that was the thing that caused me the most pain.
I'm going to sound really dumb, John, but we can't feel the way that we can feel our skin. We can't feel our internal organs.
Yeah.
So you can have a field day and resect, remove,
we wouldn't probably
reattach.
use that phrase.
And you can do a whole bunch of stuff to your internal organs, and you wouldn't actually feel that.
That's true. It's true.
That's just weird, isn't it?
Let's be clear, though, that the peritoneal lining of the abdominal cavity is exquisitely sensitive. And that's why when it's inflamed, that's peritonitis.
Yes.
And you know in lay language that's a really sore situation. But yes, there's a lot of things that you can do inside that the patient doesn't experience pain from.
Yeah.
But the wound is the most painful part of it.
So if you address that, then it's a more comfortable, straightforward procedure for all involved.
Yeah.
Well, patient particularly. Yeah. Okay. So fairly common complications. The highest complaint, shall we say, for some surgical interventions. So unmet need. This should address that need. Yeah. You have to demonstrate that it does those things, and that's where you're now into the clinical trial.
Yeah, so we've worn these ourselves. It's obviously an adhesive product. We have to stick it on the skin. Got to avoid allergies. So hypoallergenic. Yep. We've got to have an adhesive that will actually sit there for at least 7 days and stay secure. So we've worn them ourselves and satisfied ourselves that it works. Having a spa, going for a run, showers, it stays on. So we're comfortable with that. But we are doing now not on ourselves, but on volunteers. And I think volunteer number 5 is today.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and so it's early days for that, but so far so good. Of course, what we're doing in that setting is we're not putting drains into people.
Yes.
We're just actually assessing this is what we're calling it a limpet. I don't know what that.
That's a cool name. Yeah.
Great. That's nice feedback. Thank you. Kind of thinking we want to project security, and I think a limpet does that.
Well, it's not going to come off. Right?
Yeah,
and those are frightfully difficult to remove.
Very difficult. So the limpet, we're testing the limpet's adherence in the first study. Is it going to stay there? And got some cool testing done, like we're going to put 500 mils, we have done 500 mils of saline attached to when they come back after 7 days, and see whether just with traction it will pull it off, and do that reproducibly. So that's the first study, which is with volunteers. The second study, of course, is actually involving the interventional radiologists, the nurses on the ward, the patients themselves, and when they've had a drain put in, we'll have our product placed on the patient, and then we'll be following them for the duration. Yeah. And I think it's one of the important principles that you get the study done independently. Obviously, I'm passionate about this. I think it's going to solve the problem. But founding directors are often a little bit biased. So getting getting an independent group, in this case, Aramanoa, who have come out of the Auckland City Hospital design group, who've actually got a user experience expertise. So they've helped design the questionnaires, and they'll be involved in actually doing the evaluation of the patients and then give us the report. Right. And I think that will have greater weight when we come to looking for further investment, that there's an independent review. Then, of course, the other work that we're doing is setting up what are now called SMEs, subject matter experts, rather than key opinion leaders. I don't know why the change, but gathering together a group of SMEs who will actually give us further insight into whether we need to iterate further. You know, the product's never really finished. There's always areas that you can continue to improve it on.
Was the selection of the material and the adhesive, was that difficult to make? I'm sure there's a bunch of materials that have been used for.
Well, we've tested
analogous.
a lot.
Yeah.
Adhesives, we're fortunate that we have companies like 3M who've got a huge range of options, have done extensive testing, and so we can actually select ones that we think are going to be best. But at the end of the day, we have to adhere to the underside of the limpet as well as to the skin. And so we need to test it on the actual product.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And with the testing that you're doing with these healthy volunteers,
yes.
Are you testing different locations on the body and different like contours?
Well, we're taking the opportunity to do some comparisons as well. So we're actually putting 4 products on each person, testing 2 different limpet materials and 2 different adhesives. And each of them are coded, and they'll be photographed daily, and it's all done really carefully.
Yeah. And you have a feel for like which will be the most appropriate one, or you just need to gather that data?
No, I'm completely objective. I do have a feeling.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah, there are some.
But I imagine, like if it's on over the rib cage or versus over the abdomen, it would be, you'd need to test that to make sure that it
exactly.
can
There's
stay
some
on
locations are better than others, and I think if you talk to
body hair, I suppose, would have an impact.
Yeah, we need to shave to put it on and defat. So you do an alcohol wipe and then place it on. And if it's a really good adhesive, you actually need alcohol to take it off. It happened the other day with the volunteers. That was really so nicely
it's part
adherent.
of me now.
Yeah, slept without problems. It was great. Yeah. So.
That's excellent. So I suppose in the clinical, and like eventually when you will do an actual, clinical trial in patients that have undergone
that's
surgery,
the second one we're planning. Yeah.
Will have you narrowed down which surgical procedure?
Yeah, that's good. So
focus on?
we've been talking to the largest distributor in New Zealand for the drains, and they've got a lot of feedback from the workplace, about how things are going. So they've sort of said these are the kind of procedures that, 1, are done most often, and 2, seem to be most problematic. So to prove your case, you really want to be in the more difficult setting and the most common setting, so you've got numbers. We also did a 3-year audit of all of the interventional radiology procedures done at Auckland Hospital, where we're going to do the trial. And it's the nephrostomy, the kidney drain, that is done most often. And it's often the most uncomfortable position because, as you said before, it's on the side and easier to snag with your arm, but also difficult to lie on unless you've got a comfortable product. But you also make a really good point that there are some locations that are clearly more difficult, like the rib margin or the hip bone. And so, the product's got to be tested in those settings as well.
So obviously there's a need from the patient's perspective here, for comfort, infection prevention, all the things that you mentioned. But can you talk me through like the business case? Like obviously things don't happen in our capitalist world without there being a return on investment or a needed product. So how does the health system, or how would insurers, or how would any payers benefit from a device such as this?
Well, as a surgeon, I have to say that I'm not the world's expert on those areas. And of course, the New Zealand market is not going to sustain a successful business. So we've been very clear from the beginning that we're doing an initial trial in New Zealand just to do any more fine tuning that we need before we actually go to the state, raise money in the States and actually look at it. And so, that whole process is something we're going to be mapping out in this coming year. So, there's 2 types of products. There's ones that's a displacement product. You're going to need to demonstrate that what you've got is better than what somebody else has got, and that we can deliver it cheaper, because that's a big factor, isn't it? Getting into a hospital in New Zealand used to be very easy before, my early part of my career. I would just say that I really would like to use that, and we'd get it. Nowadays you have procurement officers, and rightly so, that are controlling the purse strings, and you have to make a case for any new product that comes in to the hospital, and it's a good process. But it's really the American market that we need to be aiming for. And this is a FDA Class 1 device, which means that the whole FDA process is very straightforward for Class 1. You probably know this, where it's essentially with a MedSafe tick in New Zealand, we can get a registration for, I think, $7,000 US, and that's it.
And then you're away.
And then you're away, because in itself it's not invasive. The drain is invasive.
Yes.
We're trying to make the drain safer.
Yeah. I suppose that the benefit from the system-wide would be the decreased incidence of post-operative infections at the drain site. Would you not be staying in hospital quite as long if it's more comfortable and you don't have these secondary effects as well? That'd be
It's probably not going to be a big cost savings, but I think one thing is if a person could go home with a drain securely in place and the district nursing to manage that, then they don't need to be in hospital quite as long. But most drains have a lifespan of 1 to 3 days, so they're not actually a long-term proposition. But there are subgroups of patients who might have it for months. So we kind of have to think about both of those situations.
And obviously, being in hospital is an incredibly expensive thing. So the earlier that a patient could be discharged
safely,
comfortably, lower risk of infection, they can see if anything's happening themselves. That would be a massive benefit. That's really cool.
But there's also something that's difficult to put money on. You can't really put money on quantify comfort, can you? But also peace of mind that the radiologists and the surgeons are worried about the operation or that things might go wrong. To know that it's secure and the patient tolerates it well is actually important. So it may not actually be a dollar value there, but from an investment point of view, huge market. When you look at the number of drains that are placed in, there's, I think, 6 really large companies just in the States, all of whom have global reach. 120 countries using these drains. There's no doubt that every drain needs some way of securing it. If we can demonstrate that. I was mentioning displacement because interventional radiologists sometimes use other products. We're really looking at displacement there. But for surgery, surgeons tend to use a suture, and what we can offer is more comfort. Because if there's, like I have in a diagram behind you, evidence that the stitch might cause traction on the skin, the bag fills up, it gets heavier, it pulls, really uncomfortable. The device itself can take the traction off the stitch because of the adhesion, distribution of that force, and therefore become much more comfortable. A comfortable patient is a happy patient.
Absolutely. I suppose that's why you want the limpet to be of a certain size, right? So you can dissipate or distribute rather the weight of the bag, or the fluid across a greater surface area.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So what's to round out the discussion? What's next for you guys? You're obviously running that volunteers in the clinical trial
with this product or the
with
other
this product. I mean, I'm sure there's millions of other things.
There's a few other things going on. With this is obviously to get it into the New Zealand market and to demonstrate that people are prepared to pay money for it, and to break into the US market with a Series A funding round. That's kind of the immediate goals. And to finish the clinical trial, obviously, before that.
Yes.
So those are the steps we can easily see that we need to go through. And, we feel we're on track for that.
That's fantastic. And I love how New Zealand has a bit of a storied history of being the first adopters of new things. FBOS is the one that everyone knows about, but there's plenty of others.
Yes,
and then like being
jet boats come to mind.
That's a fantastic one. And then we've got some great innovators that have done things here before anyone else, which is fantastic. But the ability that you can show it works, and people are willing to spend money on it, and it has a benefit, and then take it to the rest of the world. One previous guest mentioned to me that that is a good thing in the short term, but some companies, particularly with higher risk products, medical device products, can come unstuck because they develop their QMS and their whole regulatory package to suit the New Zealand market, which is very different from the rest of the world. It's almost automatic to be able to register a product in New Zealand, whereas it's a little bit harder.
Yeah, no, I think we took that advice on board very early on, and so we're innovating for there.
Yes, yeah.
And I don't really want to go to the US market first, but obviously they've got the population and they've got the funding.
Yeah.
We can prove our case there. Yeah. Then the world's your oyster, isn't it? Beyond that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you don't develop a product just for New Zealand. I mean, New Zealand will benefit from it for sure, but like it's not going to work.
Yeah, that's right.
Without the support of the US. Just to finish up, what advice would you have for someone who has an interest in this like translational piece? Doesn't have to be in the surgical field, but you and I were talking that you don't get taught this stuff. You kind of have to learn it along the way, or kind of ride along the coattails of someone else has already done it.
Yeah, I don't think that's absolutely true yet, because there's like a master's course which we help set up for devices, but there's also entrepreneurship courses in the business school. So there's actually, and we're with TTM, there's a whole range of things that we're doing through TTM now, which is about supporting clinical researchers, helping with Māori and Pacific, looking at early clinical trials, all the kind of things that people need, and bringing in advice. That's the incubator concept, just on a slightly within the university. So my advice is the same as I would give to people who are interested in finding out whether they want to do research or not, is to find somebody who is doing it, and to get alongside them. And you need mentors, inspiration from them. Need to be given opportunities, to be entrusted with opportunities. So it's one of the things that's been really important in the development of the STAR Centre for us, is to create an environment in which people could come in and test themselves out, see whether they like it or not. And, the wider ecosystem for us is ABI, Auckland Bioengineering Institute, and the wider institute is ecosystem is the national TTM.
Yes.
And so, there's plenty of opportunities now to get alongside successful entrepreneurs, successful innovators, and to see how it goes for you.
Yeah.
And we welcome those people all the time.
Awesome. Love it. Well, all the best, John. We'll be keeping close an eye on what happens next with the Limpet and all your other pursuits.
Yeah, thank you.